Hi, Peter, and welcome everyone to our webinar. We're very excited to have you here today as we're gearing towards the Future of Competition Summit in Seattle on June 26th. My name is Chedva Kleinhandler. I'm the CEO and co-founder of EMERJ, a peer-to-peer learning and knowledge-sharing solution. Today I'm here with Peter Phelan, founder and CEO of ValuesCulture, a global tech chief people officer turned culture doctor to companies from startup to enterprise level and beyond. And today we'll discuss a topic that's near and dear to my heart, human connection in the age of AI. I know it could be a little bit surprising, but how empathy and not necessarily robots is becoming key as companies have the rising need to engage millennials and Gen Z employees in the workplace. So Peter, let's start with a few questions to you, if you don't mind.
Perfect, sounds great.
Awesome. Okay, so let's talk about what's different about how Gen Z act when it comes to the implication of AI and empathy. I know we're speaking a lot about Gen Z, but just a second ago we spoke about millennials. So what are the differences that you see, Peter?
Yeah, fascinating movement. I have got a couple of Gen Zers in my family, a couple of little, case studies to observe. I know you have one as well. And, it's, I guess, Generation Z is the first, truly internet-born generation. They really can't remember a time before everything was not only tech-enabled, but, kind of the second generation. So actually tools that work. So it's radically different from what I grew up as a Generation Xer. And it does definitely change expectations in terms of what they're going to get from their organizations, from a learning perspective, from a FaceTime perspective. And I think it's a fun time to be a Gen Zer. They got a lot of advantages we didn't have.
As you said, I see one live and kicking case study at home, and as an elder millennial, it's really fascinating to see the differences that are supposed to be so small, but are pretty meaningful. So Peter, there are a lot of generations being thrust together in the workplace today, and at the same time, a lot of evolution in tools to analyze employee sentiment. Are you seeing any separate tools for separate generations, and should there be separate tools for separate generations?
Well, I hope there won't be anytime soon, because then an organization's conversation maybe about how we need to work together could be fractured in a destructive way. There's a lot of growing popularity with tools like Culture Amp, which are, I think, quite effective and a very thoughtful kind of evolution of like the classic Gallup 12 questions. And within that, you'll have different maybe demographics giving different responses, but hopefully in a way that's helpful and boils down to the things that we all care about, but has their own nuance. Gallup 12 questions, as you know, basically tap into a group of folks' ability to relate to the organization's mission, to their colleagues, to their boss, and to how they're being developed and growing. So I think those are true for every generation. And while we'll be struck by differences in how different generations want to receive information, and how they want to have deep empathy in certain ways, the differences won't be so drastic that you need a whole separate tool. I think the case studies at home are interesting, and there are parallels between what I see with my two little kids, or not so little anymore, and what I see in the workplace with my clients. So my daughter, for example, recently achieved a nice level of mastery on the keyboard without having had a piano teacher, which is very different from maybe our growing up. She had some violin skills, and she was able to kind of leverage those and the ability to read music, and then teach herself the keyboard using YouTube and an app. And now she's really good, and I hear some 1990s classics coming out of her room, which warmed my heart, of course, before she was born. But I love those songs, and she was able to do that on her own. In the workplace, I think that we often see, Gen Zers and, to a certain extent, millennials, wanting to, the simple stuff. Yeah, they'll figure it out on their own. They'll be resourceful in ways that, maybe you and I never could be as resourceful growing up, before the internet was as good as it is today. And they'll get the best stuff out there. And then they want to look to humans for the more complex next level, answers or problem solving, because we have maybe more in-depth experience, life experience, that we can offer to a Gen Z, or hopefully there's something we can still offer them, right? So, that's, again, what I see in the workplace as well is, and at home, the low-hanging fruit can be provided through education, through educational tools, scalable resources. But then when it comes to the unique problems, maybe, with one of my kids at school, or one with my CEOs I'm working with who has a board issue that they haven't confronted before, it's then that they want unintermediated by tech, deep conversation, put the tech to one side, and let's talk about, all how these moving parts come together and what the solution might be.
I love that, Peter. So I have a follow-up question. While you were speaking about sort of the synergy between using tech tools for the low-hanging fruit, for like the really easy stuff that's more scalable, that's more like, that has a pattern to it, right? That you can sort of identify and learn and research, and there's never has been a time where it was as easy to research things on your own as it is now. On the other side, you want the human connection. And what I'm hearing and what you're saying is that when you want the human connection, it needs to be much deeper, much more full of empathy. And I've been thinking both in my parents and in my boss sort of mode, hat on, how we as parents, or we as bosses, or we as colleagues are also living in 2019 and being addicted to tech, and maybe have much shorter attention span than we used to have 10 or 20 years ago, or maybe even a year ago. So what do you think this means for employers and for managers? And of course, as parents, to our little case studies at home, what does that mean, and what do we need to expect from ourselves on the empathy side and in providing the human connection side?
Yeah, it's super interesting, and it's demanding. I'll talk about my kids again just for a second, because they're such great representations of the generation, and they are pretty discerning critics of different teaching styles. And if a teacher just kind of provides cursory, remarks on a homework assignment where, they say, yes, you did this, you showed your work, you gave this relevant example, you follow the rubric kind of thing. My kids are completely unimpressed. They're like, yes, I know whether or not I follow the rubric. I don't need you to tell me that. I want us to, to go deeper, and for your comments to go deeper than that. So it's back in the workplace, this kind of top-down manager of, hey, I need you to do new task XYZ, the old drop and run, and get back to me tomorrow and show me your progress. That doesn't quite fly anymore. They'll want in-depth guidance so they know they're not wasting their time, the investment of face-to-face, hopefully with the phone put down and to the side. There's this super interesting, in the tech-enabled age, and some of the research in Inc. That I mentioned earlier, refers to this, where they crave quality, face time, in volumes and in levels of kind of focused intensity that we may not be used to, as Generation Xers, or in your case, a millennial. So, that poses some real challenges. I had a friend of mine who recently left a performance management tool, where, he thought that the business model ultimately was flatlining in terms of revenue, because they had put too much emphasis on loading all of the performance feedback into the app. and that it just wasn't providing the kind of growth and empathy that the clients, generation Y and Zers were craving. That it was great but insufficient. It was too techy. So yeah, it's an interesting balance we have to strike now, and it may be too much, for one manager to handle, especially a Generation X manager, in terms of all the needs that a high-performing, high-demand Generation Z may have, which may be the reason why platforms are popping up with all kinds of different coaching, and EMERJ is a solution as well. I think there's a need.
I think that's really fascinating. When we're speaking about the future of work, we tend so much to speak about robots and will they replace us? But I think one thing that I'm taking away from this is we need to make sure that we don't turn into robots, right? And use so much technology that we lose the human edge. And there's interesting research really on how the professions of the future are the ones that technology cannot replace. So using this as a sort of a segue to our next question, Peter, how does the research on Gen Z at work dovetail with what you've seen outside the home on the streets of Silicon Alley where you do your culture doctor work? And can you maybe also help us and give a little bit of explanation on what it means to be a culture doctor dealing with different generations in the workplace?
For sure. So the culture doctor practice is largely born out of my seeing an organizational need in Silicon Alley tech companies when I was first on the inside as a chief people officer for a very healthy feedback loop between the team and leadership, so that there was a lot of conversation going on about what the employee experience was like, and if there were, if maybe entry-level folks who could be a generation down from the leaders who are still quite young, but they might be 30-somethings, and the entry-level employees might be 20-somethings, about, were their needs being met in terms of the same kind of principles, in the Gallup 12 model about connection to what the company's mission was. Is there clear behavioral expectations, which might be codified in the form of values? Are they being adhered to? Did they set the right values? Were they overly aspirational, or were they, just right and based on the truth? So, from the inside, I saw that there were really healthy outcomes when you got the culture thing right, and the dialogue was healthy, and the feedback was being acted upon. That could make for cultures where people would take stars would even take a lateral pay, move just to work in an organization where they could have that empathy, not only from the organization, but also by, the managers there being very attuned to, the healthiness of the feedback loop versus a top-down approach. Seeing that play out, it's interesting. There's a very cluttered kind of marketplace of talent tech solutions out there, which is great. There's lots of wonderful ideas. Some of them are working out, others not so much. But the Silicon Alley tech entrepreneur, thankfully, they're game to try anything in terms of making the workplace better, helping communication, helping alignment. Every leader cares about that just as much as the individuals want to be connected to the mission. But what's happened is that there's probably too many tools in some cases out there. And maybe some of them are just adding a sliver of kind of lift in terms of performance versus, and I think particularly transformative, but VC money is being pumped into the sector. So, you're getting a lot of live experiments out there. And they're not without risk. So I think something or tools which can kind of just keep to the basics of helping strong connections between a group of people, be it an entire organization or an individual and their manager. And I think that can promote more human connection, ironically, is typically going to be better when you've when the last thing you want is another tool. If you've already got 5 platforms you're working in every day, a 6th is not going to be welcome in most cases. And yeah, going back to that failed, performance management tool, if you have too much reliance on tech, it'll typically, not work out as well. I think the fact that we're talking on Zoom right now, and that Zoom is such an amazing success story, speaks to the fact that there's a real importance in human connection in a tech-enabled age, where there's increasingly, distributed workforces, global companies, even tiny companies can often be global now, that the craving for human connection should be part of, any communication strategy or any entrepreneur thinking about a tool that'll make organizations more effective.
Definitely, I can connect to this so much, and I think, Peter, we both know and admire companies that manage to have a fully or partially remote workforce, like Envision, like Buffer. A lot of them are just working on Zoom all day long, and what they're managing to do when they're managing to do it successfully is really create that human connection, even remotely, even across locations and cultures, using tech, but without, as you said, without relying on tech to replace the human connection. And I think that's maybe the key takeaway.